All right, I'm going to start with a film that was used to launch our local creative awards, the Access Awards in New Zealand, a couple of years ago. You'll need to excuse, there are a couple of New Zealand in-jokes which you might not get, but the rest of it should give you a giggle.
Hush, hush everybody. It's time to think about this very special country of ours, New Zealand. More awards last year for creativity per capita than any other country in the world. How? Why? It's because, my friends, we have the perfect conditions for creativity. Our weather, warm enough to make you feel energized, and then, as soon as you start thinking about leaving the agency early to get to the beach, bang, it turns to shit. The Kiwi girls. Attractive? Yes, but not so attractive that they distract you from the task at hand in the office. Look at the Italian girls. Then look at how crap their ads are. Our urban architecture. So hard on the eye that the best place to be is inside the building, working on that radio ad. We have world-class production companies that will make a 90-second TVC for $17.50. Luckily for the young creatives, the country's creative directors are caught up in a terrifying awards arms race, a rivalry not seen since they were back in England playing Wet the Biscuit at university. New Zealand has no celebrities, and so agencies have to sell the products with brilliant ideas instead, or use hard-up international ones. A-class drugs are obscenely expensive, so advertising people have to put in the late nights and weekends at the office to afford them. We are connected to the rest of the world by super-fast broadband, which is wonderful because creatives have to think up their own ideas instead of borrowing them off YouTube. Our unique geographical layout, a country divided into two almighty and competitive creative powerhouses, Parnell and Ponsonby. Only joking, Duster. And also being just far enough away from Australia not to get sucked into their deadly vortex of corporate banality.
Look, I told you, mate. Lose the idea.
That's right, everybody. We have one canned lion per every 155,989 New Zealanders, making us the most creative country in the world! New Zealand! Fuck, it's good here!
Hi, my name's James and I'm from New Zealand. And it's a real buzz to be here. Like Donald was saying, you know, our industry kind of grew up on yours, and certainly like all of my peers really grew up as students of the British advertising industry. You know, your planning pedigree, your creative pedigree, your craft and execution pedigree is second to none, and we've kind of all grown up in New Zealand on the wisdom of John Hegarty and John Steele and Dave Trott and Peter and Donald and Paul and you know, the wonderful thinkers that your industry has produced. And somehow kind of that learning kind of combined with the culture of New Zealand has resulted in us doing this kind of style of creativity, which is our own. And I'm hugely proud of our industry in New Zealand and the work that we produce. And I feel hugely proud about watching us in our Australia, who are kind of our closest sparring partners, romping up Donald's charts and cutting it with the best of them. And I've often had people talk to me about our work and ask me, how do we get away with it? You know, particularly the more audacious stuff, which seems like it defies the kind of laws of physics of the client sign-off process. And not only that, but how we get away with doing so much of it for a country that's as small, and an ad industry that's as small as us. And as that kind of video makes a joke of, we definitely have a really amazingly conducive environment for creativity in New Zealand. And we're all very aware of that, of how good we've got it in Australia and New Zealand. And any of us who travel and work abroad certainly miss the creature comforts of home when we're working away. And the obvious differences are about scale. So we're a much smaller nation in New Zealand, and even Australia is much smaller than your market and the US. And smaller markets mean that clients are spending less and therefore risking less, and so there's less policy and politics and process and all of that stuff. But the observation that we get away with the work that we do because we're smaller isn't a very useful one. So no bigger market is going to suddenly become small. And so, you know, what I wanted to do today was dig more into the kind of the cultural factors of New Zealand and Australia that kind of allow us to do the work that we do. And I guess which, you know, the kind of things which maybe, if one were inclined, could be adopted to in those larger markets to kind of explore a new way of doing things, or just to kind of learn our tricks to push us back down to our rightful place in the gun report. To explore these cultural factors, I've spent the last month talking to 4 of our leading executive creative directors in New Zealand and Australia, and just asking them about the kind of the best work that they've done and how they've gotten away with doing it. I've spoken to 4 of them on sort of how the culture of creativity in New Zealand and Australia differs from that in larger markets. First person I spoke to was James Mok. James is ECD of FCB in New Zealand. FCB is our creative agency of the year this year, and they did the wonderful Driving Dogs campaign last year. Secondly, I just spoke to John Mescall, who's ECD of McCann in Australia. They're Australia's Creative Agency of the Year, and they, of course, did Dumb Ways to Die, which is pretty much beyond reproach as a creative campaign. Thirdly, I spoke to Toby Taylor. Toby was ECD here of Rainy Kelly last year before he returned back to New Zealand, and now he's ECD of TBWA in Auckland. And lastly, I spoke to Nick Worthington, who's by far Australasia's most awarded creative director. And Nick spent the first half of his career here at BBH and AMV before moving to Australia, and now he's creative chairman of Colenso BBDO. And I asked all of them, you know, what do they think the culture of creativity is about in New Zealand and Australia? How does it differ from others? And what's kind of a campaign that really epitomises that culture for them? And how did they get away with doing that? And I'm going to share these conversations with you, and I hope they provide some thoughtful stimulus as well as some good laughs. Up first is James Mok from FCB New Zealand. So I asked James to talk to us a bit about driving dogs and how they got away with doing that and what that kind of process looked like. And so we'll watch the case study first, and then James has a few words for us.
The category Top 10 Signs Your Dog is a Bad Driver. I love this as life itself, ladies and gentlemen.
What is this about?
In a campaign to show the intelligence and potential of rescue dogs, an animal trainer in New Zealand has been teaching dogs to drive automobile.
Push for accelerator, push for brake.
That's clever. Good boy. Wait. Yeah. Good. Wait.
Turn on the ignition. Let's go. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good boy. Good boy.
Ride with me.
Good boy.
On the streets right now. Hot issue on the streets right now. Yeah. Ride with me. Ride with me. Roll with me. Let's
Good
roll.
boy.
Let's roll with me. Yeah.
Good.
All day.
Right.
All night now.
Good boy. Ready? Ready?
Yeah.
Turn.
Yeah. It's the real hot.
Good.
Say what? It's the real hot issue on the streets right now. Right now. It's the real hot issue on the streets right now.
Good boy. Good. Good boy. Wait. And B. Good boy. B. Good.
Come on, let's go. Let's take 'em for a ride. Let's take 'em for a ride.
Nothing we've done has travelled the world like the story Tristram Clayton did on Monday night about dogs driving cars. Hey, Monty, good dog.
Imagine driving along the freeway and seeing that the driver in the next lane is a dog.
What they're doing down here in New Zealand, teaching some rescue dogs to drive.
Dog handlers in New Zealand training dogs how to drive cars.
It all looks perfectly natural.
Yeah, pretty amazing story, and if you get the chance to see the footage, you've got to see it. It's very funny because the dogs are very regal in their pose when they're driving. They're like a butler, or a chauffeur, I should say.
What I couldn't get over was their posture, and we will post it on our Twitter site at 4BC Breakfast, the video online. Just a remarkable achievement, and what a great way to go about promoting dog adoption.
But it's very funny to watch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The client just knew that if we could actually pull this off, it would be awesome. And even if we couldn't pull it off, it was still going to be entertaining. A few years ago, the whole 70-20-10 model started coming out about the way clients should perhaps look at the way they spend the money. This would have been a 10% thing. You learn a lot about how you engage with your public. You learn a lot about how far you can stretch your brand. And that was really the way we approached it. It was a very small investment in the end of the day for the client, with some relatively low risk, incredibly high reward. So everyone kind of approached it from that point of view. I think if it was part of your 70% spend, yeah, a little bit trickier. But in the end, I think that the culture of openness that we had, that we knew we had a really great idea, we knew that the opportunity to get incredible fame for the brand, get a lot of adoptions for dogs, make the SPCA really relevant to people's worlds, was really, really high. And we had a really great animal trainer. We knew it's through what they told us that dogs are incredibly trainable. We made 100 modifications to a Mini Countryman to ensure that a dog could comfortably operate the different things. So, you make that calculated risk. Tick all those boxes. We should actually get to a point where they can drive. And, in the lead up to the live event, which had its own risk, we had to know that the dogs could drive. And as we were progressing along, I think that 3-month period where the dogs were trained, you could see the dogs progressing, and you could certainly see the weight off the creative team's shoulders as they came back from those training sessions and went, the dogs are driving, not driving very well, but they're driving, So it gave you an enormous amount of confidence all the way along that this thing was moving towards exactly the goal that we wanted to have. It gave us huge confidence. But I guess it does require the client to be really open. It does require the client to accept failure as a possibility, but spectacular failure. And that within the spectacular failure was also opportunity. To even experiment around it was going to create all sorts of interesting content for people to watch. So we didn't actually ever think that we would lose through the idea. It would just be better and better the more the dogs could perform.
We have a fairly good relationship with failure in New Zealand and Australia, I think. Not that we set out to fail and not that we kind of enjoy failing, but there's kind of a way of accepting failure as a possible outcome of doing something that's really kind of risky or really new or really original or whatever, and looking for, if we do fail, what are the other effects of the campaign going to be? Even if the dogs couldn't drive, it would have stimulated a lot of conversation. What are we going to learn from something that fails, and how important is that actually in the bigger scheme of things? We have quite a good relationship with failure in New Zealand. Next up, John Mescall, who I think has won more awards for Dumb Ways to Die than anyone's ever won for another campaign. And I asked him to tell us a little bit about how they got away with Dumb Ways to Die.
Hi, I'm John Mescall, Executive Creative Director of McCann Australia, and I've been asked to talk to you briefly about how we got away with making Dumb Ways to Die, probably the world's most unusual and subversive rail safety campaign.
Young people don't listen to public safety messages, so how do you get them to stop being unsafe around trains? By making it the dumbest way to die.
Dumb ways to die, so many dumb ways to die. Dumb ways to die, so many dumb ways.
A song was written called Dumb Ways to Die. It was released as a YouTube video and within a week had over 20 million views and coverage on every television network in the country. A dedicated Tumblr site generated huge and immediate viral effect. Within days, Dumb Ways to Die became the world's most shared video. The song was released on iTunes and climbed the charts in over 20 countries, making its way onto playlists everywhere. Radio advertising was purchased, but this song about rail safety was so popular, radio stations played it for free. Awareness went through the roof, but we had to get people to change their behaviour. So every element of the campaign directly drove people to pledge to be safe around trains. Nearly 1 million people took the pledge on our website. The little book of Dumb Ways to Die asked kids to take the pledge. Outdoor advertising got people to promise to be safe and generated Instagram-friendly content. A smartphone game also got people to make the promise. And at train stations, a karaoke version of the song played while posters visually reinforced the message. The results? People adopted the rail safety message like never before. Over 200 cover versions were made. Schools started using it as a teaching tool in classrooms. Dumb Ways to Die became the most shared public service campaign in history. And most important of all, the Metro has seen a 21% reduction in accidents and deaths compared to the same time last year.
Be safe around trains, a message from Metro.
I kind of pinpointed 3 key ways we work with not just the Metro client but other clients that allow us to, just do the sort of work that I guess people might look at and think, again, how the hell did you get away with doing that? Probably the most important aspect of the relationship, and most of this comes down to the relationship we seek to build and sustain between agency and client. And that's probably at the key of everything. And the most important aspect of that is whenever we have a conversation, either with the client or with ourselves in the agency, we always make sure that the audience, the consumer or whatever we call them, is in the room with us. We do not make work in isolation. We don't ever try and sell ideas that are clever for cleverness sake. When we talk to Metro early on about the idea, we framed it in such a way that we were just seeking to find the idea that would work the best in the real world. So every conversation we have with our clients is about real world creative impact, not about theoretical marketing constructs. And when you frame the discussion around, the sorts of ideas you seek to make with clients and when you focus your attention on, don't look at this as a marketing person. We don't look at it as advertising practitioners. What would a real, normal person out there who doesn't react particularly well to most advertising, let's be honest, what would actually work with them? Would someone look at this and want to share it? Would they fall in love with it? Would they repurpose it? Would they share it? And when you have those sorts of conversations where you really put the bullshit filter on and you focus entirely on what will work in the real world, I think you break down a lot of barriers. You are removing a key obstacle that stops a lot of people saying yes to unusual work.
One of the things that our clients and us, I think, have become really good allies on is that thing that John calls real-world creative impact. So really sitting down and asking that question, if you had the consumer in the room with you, is this something they're going to share? Is this something they're going to talk about? Is it something they're going to pass on? And using that almost as kind of the primary yardstick for whether we should kind of proceed with an idea. I think that's a really important thing that's become very well understood among our client community, is just the kind of the importance of that. And that often allows us to, progress the sorts of ideas that otherwise might be thrown in the can. The next person I spoke to was Toby. So Toby's been back and forth between New Zealand and the UK a couple of times now. He's originally British, and he's one of consistently the most awarded creative directors in our part of the world. And recently he was here just last year as CD of Rainy Kelly, and I asked him about his kind of observations of the cultural differences between the two industries.
What happens here, which I really kind of missed when I was back in the UK, is the sort of sense of informality around the process that we're in. You know, I think the more formal advertising becomes, the worse it becomes. You see the worst of advertising. It's sort of, the more it becomes, kind of elevated into this kind of rather stiff kind of process, that the worse it gets. I'm not suggesting that everything should be kind of conducted over a pint of beer in a pub and made very, very kind of simplified to such an extent that there's no sort of, there needs to be an opportunity for a leap or two to happen, whether it's the brief or whether it's just the creativity itself, there needs to have a bit of separation needs to happen. But I think what happens here that I really love is that, quite often you can go to a room and you walk into the room here and you meet a bunch of people and they'll tell you about their problems, which I think is really important because you hear a first-hand account, but at the end of it, you haven't changed their problems, but you've actually helped them see that maybe their problem wasn't as big as it was, or actually their problem is something else. And I think that opportunity to keep things fluid is more alive here than it perhaps is in other countries.
And what he's saying about problems is really true. As a planner, I guess I view my job as mostly being about defining the problem and finding my way to the root cause of it. And in New Zealand, Australia, I guess we do have this way of making sure we get the person from the client end who has the best understanding of the problem as close as possible to the creative people and the planners. And by doing that, and not playing Chinese whispers, we get to solutions, I think, that are a lot more effective really, really quickly and without too much fussing around. It's one of the nice things about our industry. I asked Toby to tell me about a campaign that he'd done that best represents the culture of creativity in New Zealand. This is what he said.
It's funny because I think of millions of naughty things that I've done in New Zealand, which are, borderline. Actually, they're not borderline, they're just distasteful, plain distasteful, that would never have gone to air in the UK. But I can see that at the same time that would be seen as rather sort of vulgar, antipodean humour, so I'm not going to give those examples. Instead, in fact, the thing that I found, because it's the IPA, the thing I find there's a lovely, if you like, there's a sort of parity, is what we did for the Effies recently, which is where we got a whole bunch of creative directors, they're eminent, best in their field creative directors, and strapped them to a polygraph test.
The response was overwhelming and received over 1
page grew by
million
450 10 days. The most successful viral campaign in history.
In the first month alone.
My name is Gavin Wilson. I'm a polygraph examiner from Australia. I usually test homicide suspects, but today it's a change of pace. And I'm going to be testing some executives from some of the top advertising agencies here in New Zealand. Have more people on award juries seen your donation glasses campaign than the actual New Zealand public? Have you ever produced an award video for an ad that never ran? Have you ever lied in an award video? Yes.
You know, it's a trade idea, sure, but I could never in a million years imagine most ECDs in London ever agreeing to that, let alone the IPA saying we think this is a good idea, we should do it, you know. So Results Don't Lie for me has a purity in its thought, it has a cheekiness in its execution. Yeah, sure, you could argue that it's easy because it's a call for entries, but I don't think anything's easy in any category anymore, I think, you know. But I loved doing that, and I loved being 3 months back into the country and then contacting mates and saying, hey, would you mind fronting up for this, you know. So I really enjoyed that.
Toby went on to make a really interesting point about one of the constraints of working in our faraway market, which is the lack of access for money for great executional people, great photographers and great directors and great typographers. And that kind of means that we have this need to come up with ideas in the absence of believing we can execute them brilliantly, which leads us to a different nature of idea, I think. Here's what he had to say.
I think that's the thing that, as a Kiwi, and I felt very much like a Kiwi going back into that industry, talking about ideas, and I was trying to stay on ideas, and people just love to think about execution. And for them, for the agency certainly that I worked at, it was a very good agency, but I think it was almost they couldn't wait to get to that point where the execution of a thought, and you're right, it's not a problem solution. It's more about like going, what kind of space can we have in this market when we're selling a car, but we don't want to be like we want to be we are a car, but we're kind of, you know, we wear these sets of clothes and we do it this way, and you go, and it becomes very kind of granular. And I think it's because, by and large as well in the UK, is that you're awash with amazing craftspeople. It's like wherever you go, there's an amazing animator or a director, or did you see that exhibition? And it's just like, you know, there's kind of almost stimulus overload. We don't have that here. And in a way that means that you can't jump to execution. You play a very dangerous game if you jump to an execution here, I find, because for the most part you're not going to get that person that you're referencing, or you're not going to be able to get straight into that. You know, you'll find that you'll do a watered down version of it. Worse still, somebody will accuse you of taking something amazing and turning it into something diluted and dreadful. So it's I don't think for me, I kind of go, it's a weird thing, that execution thing, and it was something that I found, although I love execution, I just go, don't rely so heavily on it. You know, like kind of think about what the idea is.
Where at all possible, we try and present clients with ideas first without any executional bias, or sometimes even any idea how we're going to execute it. And that does a couple of things. One, it allows us to have the freedom to not necessarily present, you know, to tick every box and have to deliver a presentation that's perfect. It allows us to present an idea and get a client to either fall in love with or hate, or sometimes somewhere in the middle, a pure idea. And that lets us have a discussion, and it lets us actually lets the client in on the game a bit. You know, while we do, you know, the creative development of the idea organically back at the agency, it gives clients some buy-in into the core thought and allows them to be part of the process.
I think the idea was always engaging, and so, you know, you couldn't fail. You almost couldn't fail. You just had to have the faith that, you know, keep on going at it, because all outcomes are pretty good.
I think that's a really interesting point. If you're forced to discard the guarantee of great executional craftspeople, just completely forget about that and presume that you won't have access to anyone who's a brilliant director or a brilliant photographer or animator. Like, does that force you actually to change the nature of your thinking? Does it make the ideas actually better ideas to begin with? Last person I spoke to was Nick Worthington, and Nick spent most of his career here at BBH and AMV, and then came to New Zealand, where I worked with him at Colenso, and Colenso's sort of gone on to become one of the most awarded agencies in the world. And like the others, I asked Nick to kind of talk about a campaign that epitomises the way that we do things in our part of the world, and I guess feels different to him than what he had done, you know, the brilliant work that he had done at the brilliant agencies here in London. And this is the idea he chose.
I think the list is long of things that we've done here. I've been involved in here that have been kind of quite remarkable, that people have said yes to them, and we've managed to actually do them. And we do. We've got a little set of words here, at Colenso, which is kind of really what we want to do. Is we want to do stuff here that no one else in the world could do, using all the things that are available to us. But really, I think when the first question you asked me about when I came to New Zealand, I think the thing that sticks in my mind the clearest in many ways is I started, one of the first jobs I worked on when we got down here was with a brewery, and I'd been working with breweries in London and familiar with the category, etc. And we started doing a job for Spates, and at the time they had some really successful advertising that wasn't working quite as well as it used to work, and we kind of said, okay, well maybe you should get back to the essence of your brand, and which is real Kiwi, guys, and really doing things that isn't actually advertising invention, that is kind of real stuff. And we were down doing an orientation thing at the brewery in Dunedin, and spent quite a bit of time with the sales guys drinking, and the head of marketing was with us drinking. The CEO had been down, chatting with us drinking, and we were talking with the head of the brewery, who told us a lovely story about how many letters he gets a week from people overseas, Kiwis overseas, and there's actually it's a quarter of Kiwis or whatever that aren't in the country at any one time, and most of them are sort of young men. And they get a lot of letters saying, hey, where could I get Spates? I'm in London, I'm in this, in this country, I'm in New York or whatever. And this little, he got these letters, and we go, oh, that's really interesting. And I was with the marketing guy, it was late in the evening, and we were talking about the dumbest shit you could do. And they had a history of, an ad of moving a pub from when the husband and wife split. It was a commercial, and they'd moved this pub. And so that was part of the brand story. There'd been a Mercy ship where Auckland's, the link between Auckland had failed, so they sailed a ship up. And these things just kind of came together in a drunken kind of evening, where we said what we should do is we should pick up one of these pubs that are in Dunedin, and we should put it on a boat, and we should take it to that guy who wrote that letter, because he said, get me some Spates. And we said, why don't we just do that? Why don't we pick up a pub and stick it on a boat, take it to London, and then tell this guy, come and have a beer? And then we kind of went off the next day, and I got a call from a guy called Arno, who's the client that I've been having this crazy conversation with, and going, we should do that. And he said, Nick, do you remember that conversation we had last night about putting a pub on a boat? And I said, I went, yep. And he says, I think it's pretty good. What do you, it's a pretty good idea. And I went, yeah, and it's a pretty good idea. He says, well, do you think we should think about doing it? And I kind of went, yeah. And we went away and worked on a program then, and got TV, station involved with this mission to take a pub around the world to the Kiwi people that were missing it. And we did it for real. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind that they spent 3 or 4 times more than the advertising budget doing, this boat. You know, all the people that it went up to, the tiers of people. Well, there was probably 2, but we had to get it signed off by some people in Aussie. And again, they looked at it and went, "Just go. Do you think you can do it?" And we kind of go, "Yep." And they go, "Well, you know, okay, you know, go for it." And everyone along the journey kind of said, "Shouldn't be too hard." And that was my welcome in many ways to New Zealand. So you have a good idea, people like it, and they just go, "Yeah, well, let's see if we can make that happen." And I remember sitting down when it left Dunedin on its trip with 5 Kiwis, and it'd been a whole long campaign. When it left New Zealand, film crew with a helicopter from the TV news was going to go down and film it, and we were sitting in a bowling alley in Dunedin, just kind of waiting for the 6 o'clock news to come on, just to see if it was kind of, you know, see if it would be that, you know, be interesting. And it had an 8-minute segment on the news that night, which was just, you know, again, coming from London, trying to, you know, get people interested in what you're doing from a brand's perspective is pretty hard. And so yeah, that was one that I remember. Yeah. Was that tight enough? It was a bit of a long one.
No, that was great.
That's all right.
Sure.
He'll love that I left that bit in. That's vintage Wortho. I want to leave on a piece of work that just about a month ago won Best in Show at our local Creative Awards in New Zealand. And it deals with an issue in New Zealand. One side of our very healthy agricultural sector, one sort of side effect of that is the problem of people driving stoned. And this campaign really demonstrates, I think, you know, how our culture and our personality and our informality come through even in our social marketing. Have a look.
When this car's finished, me and my dad will just cruise around being all scucks and doing mean-ass burnouts.
Bro, my dad invented burnouts.
He invented skiddies, more like it.
Not. My dad's the bestest driver, even when he's been blazing.
My dad invented blazing.
My dad gets the blazedest.
When my dad's blazed, he drives smooth as, like this.
Nah, move over, bro. My dad's been blazing, he drives like this.
Nah, bro, like this.
Nah, bro, like this.
What street do I live on again?
Hey, this ain't my car. Check out this cheeky fella. Looks just like me.
I love this music.
What music?
I'm going 5 k's an hour! It's too fast! It's too fast! Take the wheel, bro! I'm freaking out! I don't want to. Lights green, bro.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's so interesting.
Ooh.
Nah, bro, you both wrong. My dad blazes and you drives like this. Boom, boom. And then there's missiles following my dad, and then it was keeping dodging all of the tigers, and then my dad had some burgers in there, and there was heaps of burgers, and that far there was heaps, man. I mean, there was heaps of bananas, and the monkeys came and had some bananas, and then my dad went off home, he had some fish and chips.
Oh, I'm off. Sure. Catch you later.
Later.
And that's it. It's been an honour. Thank you.